Hello and welcome to Okawa Book Club. We're your hosts. I'm Hannah.
I'm John.
And on this podcast, we'll be discussing the books of international best-selling author, world teacher, and CEO of Happy Science, Master Ryuho Okawa.
As of June 1st, 2022, Master Ryuho Okawa has published over 3,000 titles on such topics as self-help, religion, spirituality, politics, and economic prosperity.
That's right. And today, we'll be talking about The Unknown Stigma, Parts 1 and 2. And this is the first of a trilogy series in the new genre, spiritual mystery. Very interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So Part 1 is called The Mystery, and Unknown Stigma Part 2 is called The Resurrection. So let's dive right in. The first one, The Mystery, it starts off very
Cryptic.
shocking, traumatic.
Yeah, I would say so.
It's kind of a way of introducing a story that's really shocking. But it provokes a lot of whys and how dark the world can be, and very frustrating.
Yeah.
As well. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I've read so many of Master Okawa's books, and they're always filled with light. So it was really a different experience to see him discussing kind of the underworld of society. And I think that's something present throughout the first novel specifically. There's instances of assault and murder and gang members and things of that nature, and you really get to sort of get an idea of the dark side of human nature. But beyond that, there's discussion of things that are influencing that behind the scenes, and that's where these spiritual elements, I think, start to come in initially. I mean, and they're pervasively there, but at the same time, there is a lot of very concrete elements in the story, which I enjoyed as well, and it's a nice blend.
Yeah, it was like a roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
Of so many emotions, and I kept thinking throughout reading it, why was this mentioned, or why did it start like this? And I guess for me, all in all, it was almost the contrast of light and evil, and the stark differences, and how ultimately there is light at the end of the tunnel, but you really have to do a lot of mind work and spiritual work, and you can't do it unless you really do that spiritual work. So that's kind of one thing I took away from it. And I wanted to ask you, in the first book, what was your most memorable part or more significant memory of the book?
That's a tough one. I mean, I remember as I was first reading it, something I really liked was the pacing. It's not totally linear, or the story itself maybe is linear, but you're getting it from different vantage points, and there's different elements happening, and you're really not sure what the nature of the protagonist is. You're not sure, is this person embodying a sense of goodness? Is there a sense of malevolence behind them? There was one scene, though, where the protagonist has sort of a spiritual attack in the middle of the night, where there's a god of death, or Shinigami, and I thought that scene was very interesting, because there's a moment of temptation, where she's given this opportunity to seek revenge, and she denies it, though, and that's where you really, I think, gain a sense of the benevolence that she's embodying. And it kind of fulfills... It gives some closure, I think, in the story. Yeah.
And it's almost like you understand why these things happen. And I don't remember if it was part 1 or 2, but I guess it was part 2. They talked to some of the people from her past and said, is she this type of person, for example? And they said no. But it really traces in those, when they dissect her thoughts, where these incidents come from, or how they can happen. And that's where, I feel the spiritual mystery aspect of it. A lot of things that happen in this world isn't A plus B equals C anymore. And I really felt that this book kind of teaches us there's other factors to why things happen, and that kind of merciful conclusion, in a sense, in the end. Yeah. But yeah, it was like reading a movie. It was very, very vivid and exciting and very scary. And every time I thought, okay, is this going to be contained here? It kind of expands out more. I'm like, oh my God, there's so many parts. And then, oh my God, it went even further. And then in part 2, it introduces like world politics. I'm
Right.
like, where is this going? And then, of course, in like the ending part, it goes even to the galaxy.
Right.
So it's really interesting how and intricate the story plot. I'm not too much into sci-fi personally, but this is, I think a lot of people who are into sci-fi might be very interested. It kind of clashes the different genres of people to enjoy this one book.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that there's almost like a process of like layers sort of expanding. It's so strange because, like you said, it's starting very sort of microcosmic.
Right.
You know, it's just there's a few people. It's kind of normal. There's the detectives solving a case, a few characters, and then before you know it, there's intelligence agencies and military involved, and war, and the whole geopolitical warfare. It's amazing how, and I think like in a way, it feels like it kind of gives you a sense of seeing your own place in the cosmos and the interconnectedness with everything.
That's very true.
And I thought that was kind of a cool element of it, you know.
What do you feel about the relevance of the things happening? Like, he did speak of the coronavirus in the book, of the war in Ukraine. And yes, he changed some of the names of these leaders, but we know who they are.
Right.
What do you feel about the relevance of now in this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incredibly contemporary. It gives a unique perspective on the present state of geopolitics and perhaps even more importantly, potential directions that it could go in. I think the sequence of events we see in the Unknown Stigma 2 is like, I mean, for many people, it might be considered sort of a worst-case scenario. But it's interesting because it is, much of it is in part catalyzed by true divinity. So, and again, it causes you to question the nature of, like, what is comfortable versus what is necessary.
Right.
And I think that seeing that on that sort of macrocosmic, worldwide scale, it's also reflected inwardly in some of the characters. And, but, yeah, returning to your original question, that kind of went tangential. I think the insights into the different wars that are happening and potential wars, they're great. And for people who aren't as well read or don't keep up to date with geopolitics, or who only are getting one side of it from the media wherever they live, I think it gives a nice overview. Also a sense of the spiritual dynamics that are underlying them.
Yeah.
Which is something that you're not really going to get anywhere else.
Right. No one ever talks about that factor. And this book really talks about how the power of prayer and faith can really manifest, and it's demonstrated in this book quite powerfully. And I think that was a hint to wake up people's subconscious minds and to consider faith again. Because throughout the book, it talks about how our civilization and civilizations of the past have disappeared because of materialism and atheism. So we are seriously headed in that path. But, what we're saying now is maybe like, what are they talking about to the podcast listener? But what we want to do is like provoke interest. And it does sound bittersweet. Some people have said this book is extremely hopeful, and some people have said it was very doomy gloomy. How do you feel about it?
I think that sometimes destruction brings creation, and I think it's necessary. And I think that was the idea in it. It's like society going to a point where it's not going to be coming back. So if things just tip too far, then there might be no option other than, as we've seen in the past, than for just a reset. And today we think of those things as myths, and we laugh at the most people, but that shows how far we've sort of degraded, right? Towards the end of a cycle, and are in need of a new beginning unless we can, well, either way, even if we do, collectively shift ourselves into a more benevolent way of living.
Yeah, and I felt like this book was kind of telling us, too, that there's more to just survival in this earth, that this isn't everything. And what does it mean to thrive? What are we here for? If we're not here just to eat and survive and breathe. And a lot of, it interplays how politics can make people want to live in that way, in that mindset, and just think, just as long as you're taken care of, you should need for nothing else. But what is that even for, right?
Right.
And we can't ignore their innermost desires to be happy and to have faith and things like that. So I really felt thriving is how we should be living, not just surviving.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there's even like, I feel like the main protagonist, like she really, throughout these books, undergoes this process of individuation. And that's not even the end. Like that's a means to the end of just coming into her purpose and, you know, realizing a sense of divinity in one's mission in life. And it's really beautiful. But, you know, there are definitely forces making people want to think that just material resources, that's it. And then, but it's kind of a hollow existence. It's
kind of sad, I think, if it's just so finite like that. But she also demonstrates in the book how or what mindset to have to draw upon the power of God, or I don't want to give too much away, but she's a very important person in this world. And one part that stood out to me was when they were talking about how, or what I took from it was, countries should ally with God.
Right.
Look up, don't just look across. And who's the one who has God's mind or the world's best intentions in mind, not just their country.
Right.
Those countries are allowed to survive and prosper. So when we think about that and look at the different countries on Earth, I mean, it seems now a lot of quote-unquote evil countries are thriving, but there is divine power in play. Yeah, I just think it's really important to ally yourself with God first.
Yeah.
That goes from a personal and also to a macro level. If we ally with prayer and meditation and like truth, instead of what the media tells us what to think or what these government people are trying to make us feel and think, I think that we will stay in line and be able to, quote unquote, survive and thrive.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I thought there was like almost a kind of meta commentary about, in that way, of like, you know, there's this theme of horizontal hierarchies being pushed, I think, in the media a lot right now. You know, just everybody being on equal ground and no vertical hierarchy. But we need vertical hierarchy. It's natural. I mean, everything in nature is vertical hierarchy, and ultimately that points to God at the summit. And yeah, I think we need that. And I love what you said there, like on an individual level, on a national level, and you know, everything in between and beyond.
Yes, and I mean, I don't know about you, but I really wish there was an Agnes in this world. I'm still secretly hoping that this book is not just a novel, but but it is scary if it was not a novel and just like a premonition. But I also took it as, is there an Agnes in us, in each one of us? And yeah, how do we resurrect that person or that being inside of us? Yeah, I started to think about what happened to her in the past, the dark past in history that she had was so ugly.
Right.
But then she is actually, in this novel, almost the most important human being, or second most important human person on Earth. So to me it says, like, no matter what you're going through, you're still important. You still have a huge mission, bigger than you know, bigger than you think. So keep pressing forward is the message that I got. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that was an underlying theme, you know, like she has these incredibly traumatic experiences, and not only does it not reflect poorly on her, but it's something that actually acts as the catalyst for her to come into herself, you know. And I think that in society today, there's such a victimization mentality pushed.
That's
you
true,
know?
Yeah.
And like, this is something that's saying, like, yes, she was the victim of a crime, but she never held that as like the fulcrum of her personality. That wasn't who she was. You know, she became something far greater.
Right.
And through the books, that just keeps expanding. But it was catalyzed by that experience. So I think, like, looking at the difficulties and traumatic experiences we've had and growing from them and seeing that maybe they were bad, but maybe there was something good that came about within ourselves, some type of resilience, some type of a newfound faith, whatever it might be.
So this book is, again, we mentioned in the beginning that it's a new genre, a spiritual mystery. And I read this book so quickly. Like, I think it's like the fastest book I've ever read. I mean, it's not too long, but it's just, you couldn't put it down.
I agree.
And it was literally like going through scenes and places on the planet and zooming in, zooming out. It was very exciting. And the way he put it together, again, was really incredible, from personal or micro to macro level. And I thought that this was like, maybe a lot of sci-fi books do this, but it's kind of boring because it's like way too much detail.
Right.
But the way Master Okawa put it was like the essential elements of what needs to be known, and like then on to the next scene. So it was very like, it catches your attention. And I felt so many people will have a lot of fun reading this book. But of course, it's not a fun per se. It's not the word I wanted to use, but very enlightening.
Yeah.
Yeah, prolific book.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I found it to be a fast read as well, and a very enjoyable read. And the pacing is great. And like you said, it's concise in all the right ways. Mm-hmm. Nothing is. Some authors can certainly ramble on about the same scene for 10 pages. That's not what you're going to get here. And so it's a nice, smooth read, and I'd really highly recommend it to anybody.
Yes, again, this is a part of a trilogy series. Part 3 will be coming out very soon. The Unknown Stigma 1 and 2 print-on-demand paperback is now available on Amazon.com, and Unknown Stigma Part 3 will be coming out later this week.
So the hardcover versions of 1, 2, and 3 are coming to bookstores in October, November, and December, respectively. For more information, please visit okawabooks.com.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you for Part 3.
Thank you.